Well, hello, folks out there in YouTube land. Got an interesting show lined up for you. This one's going to be kind of fun, unless you're a Michigan fan, and then it probably won't be. Looks like Harbaugh is going to get suspended for at least 4 games, and I think the major question everybody needs to know or needs to ask is, where is the beef?
Where's the beef? Where's the beef?
And this story comes from SB Nation by Joseph Acosta. It says, Jim Harbaugh suspension over literal beef in recruiting. We're going to get into this. And I actually covered this several months ago, that he was going to get suspended over cheeseburgers. And it looks like that's exactly what's going to happen. It says the NCAA announced that they'll be suspending Michigan head coach Jim Harbaugh for 4 games as a result of an investigation into statements that he made to the NCAA. They're basically saying he lied to the NCAA. And he said, what did Harbaugh allegedly do? He didn't do much. But I think what they're trying to say is that the cover-up is worse than the crime, which is exactly what happened to Bruce Pearl. If you remember, Bruce Pearl got suspended and actually wound up losing his job and getting a big 3-year show cause over the fact that he had a barbecue. And he, I guess, invited or had some players there that weren't supposed to be there. And then when the NCAA asked him about it, I think he didn't tell them the truth and said that he wasn't there. And then there were pictures showed up where the kid was eating a barbecue sandwich. So he got basically fired over a barbecue sandwich and lost his job, 3-year show cause, and got put out in the wilderness for a while. I think we've got a similar situation here with Harbaugh. I don't think it's going to be as bad. It says Harbaugh's being suspended for alleged false statements made to the NCAA in response to investigation of recruiting violations he and Michigan staff members made. Violations were level 2 violations, which means they're very small violations in reality. They were during the COVID-19 dead period, where the coaches weren't allowed to meet with recruits physically, texting a recruit outside of an allowable time period, having coaches watch players work out over Zoom, which is extremely ticky-tack stuff. But during that period of time, things were a little bit crazy. And where did Jim Harbaugh meet these recruits? Allegedly at the Brown Jug, a Michigan institution where Harbaugh bought the recruits hamburgers. Hamburgers. So yes, this beef is over, well, beef. Says the higher, more serious accusation is the level 1 violation where he lied, supposedly. Didn't tell him the truth.
Liar!
And it says why only 4 games. Harbaugh and the NCAA negotiated and agreed upon suspension. Oh, you lied to our investigators about some recruiting violations. Yeah, we'll work out a fair and reasonable suspension, etc. And I think there was other coaches involved, and they got like a 1-game suspension and stuff like that. And don't worry about Michigan, because when you see their schedule, this is why I want to make this clear. When you ever, I mean ever, hear any other fan base from another conference talk about, oh, the SEC only plays 8 games, they should play 9. It's real easy to add a game when you're playing Little Sisters of the Poor in your conference, and we're supposed to play Alabama, Georgia, Florida, or maybe you got to play Tennessee or Texas A&M, South Carolina, you know, some teams that'll put a whooping on you if you're not careful, LSU. Well, let's take a look at their first 4 games. They open up with East Carolina, then UNLV, then they've got Bowling Green, and then I guess this is a conference game, Rutgers. And they won't face a team in the top 50 until October, and they will not face a team in the top 25 until November, when they finally have to play one good team, which is Penn State, and then, of course, they got to play Ohio State. They have 2 tough games all year. The rest are cakewalks. They just basically roll the football out there, and they decide if they want to win by 30 or 40. So when they want to add a conference game, it's no big deal. If all we were doing was adding Vanderbilt every year, well, let's go to 9. But you know what? It's different in the SEC. Like, we're playing an ACC team this year, Virginia. That's going to be an easy game. And Virginia's typically a decent team in the ACC. We played an ACC club last year. It was their very best team, the conference champion, and that was Clemson.
Oh, who won that fight anyway?
And how'd that work out for Clemson? And Clemson's a good club. I'm not sitting here ripping on them. But they played 2 SEC teams last year. They went 0-2, and that was the ACC champion. So there you go. So I just don't, we should not go to 9 games unless we get $140 million extra bucks. If we don't, I'm not for it. Now, if you want to add a Power 5 game against an ACC club or something along those lines, the Big 12, whatever, that's fine. We can do that all day. I'll be glad to play Rutgers or I don't know. Who's the other ones? There's so many. It's ridiculous. Anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox here for a minute. I'm just tired of these conferences complaining about the SEC when they know we're so much better than them. It's ridiculous. They just want us to beat each other up and knock ourselves out of the playoffs. Well, we're not going to do that. We already do that already. We don't need an extra game to do it. Now, you look at this picture and you think, well, why is Tennessee involved with this? Well, first of all, there's Bruce Pearl, who basically did the same thing, only he got really hammered. The second part is a Michigan sports writer had to bring up the Vols in comparison, of course. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, we might as well get used to being compared to whenever the NCAA does anything. It's going to be like, oh, well, you didn't do anything to Tennessee. You didn't do anything. Wrong. And this is a story in Maize and Brew, SB Nation, a Michigan Wolverines community. And this is by Trevor Woods. He said, Jim Harbaugh's suspension by NCAA is absurd at a time when Tennessee's paying players. So you can tell this is going to be a very fair story towards the Vols. It says Michigan's football season started a little over a month. We'll start in a little over a month, and now there's a report that head coach won't be around for the first 4 games. And it talks about the very thing that we just discussed, getting basically suspended over a cheeseburger. It says the NCAA's punishment seems especially harsh considering Michigan self-reported these violations, and Harbaugh reported stance back in January per Dellinger was that he didn't recall the events when first speaking with investigators, but that he was never purposely dishonest. Instead of giving Harbaugh the benefit of a doubt, the NCAA made what feels like a vendetta against Harbaugh, a public tarring and feathering. Harbaugh's reported suspension also comes at a time when there have been much more serious matters the college football world has had to digest. Northwestern, with all their problems, and Tennessee, of course, who recently was deemed guilty for NCAA paying players and paying their recruits meals and hotel stays. And he goes all into that report, and he said all Tennessee basically got handed because they had what was considered exemplary response while cooperating with investigators. Tennessee got fined $8 million, the most ever in the history of the NCAA. And then here's the important part. This is where you know it's biased. He says some scholarships. Why can't they say 28 scholarships? This is what was it? Dennis Dodd did the same thing. Some scholarships. It's 28. Are y'all allergic to those facts? 28. Just say 28. You can say that's a lot. You can say that's a little. But don't say some, because some sounds like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's 28. The other thing that they never, ever, ever talk about, because it goes against their narrative, and you know I always think about narrative because it's just how it is. 3 years with a cloud over us. 3 years that hurts your recruiting big time and stresses out the entire staff and everybody involved, and they've had to cooperate with NCAA with tons of meetings, Zoom meetings, legal fees, all those things for 36 months while all this was being determined, constantly being negatively recruited against by all the SEC and big-time clubs who say, you don't want to go there. They're going to get all kinds of bowl bans. They might get the death penalty. Anything can happen. I mean, they were paying players. Are you kidding? $60,000. So that's where they're basically saying, you can't do anything to us because you didn't do anything to Tennessee. Well, here's what else they did. The head coach got fired and lost $13 million. He's also not been able to work in college sports for the last 3 years, plus another 6 years that he got for a show cause. That's 9 years. So he lost $13 million and can't work in college sports for 9 years, where he could have gone back to Alabama for $2 million a year and been their defensive coordinator. They would have hired him like that. Okay, so that's left out of the article, of course. Then there were 3 or 4 other assistant coaches that got 3 and 4 year show causes on top of the 3-year show cause they basically got over the last 36 months. So that's 6 to 7 years of multiple coaches can't coach, can't make a living in college sports. So they leave that part out, which is very convenient. Then on top of that, they forget about the fact that we lost 13 scholarships the first year, then I think about 5 the next year, and then the next 5 years we got to lose 2 each time. So 28 scholarships, $8 million, legal fees, 3-year cloud over us, and 28 scholarships. So yeah, we got off real easy. Could it have been worse? Yeah, had we not cooperated. But what did the chancellor do? As soon as she found out about it from a whistleblower, she took it seriously. She didn't ignore it, and she investigated it, called the NCAA and said, we got a problem here. We're investigating, and we're going to keep you updated the entire way through. Immediately fired all the coaches, did an investigation, and literally handed all the evidence over to the NCAA and said, there you go.
Got the evidence. Put the evidence in the car. Put the evidence in the car.
There you go, on a silver platter. saving the NCAA from having to do that and finding out more than they could have ever found out. So it's kind of ridiculous. We got hammered, really, for about 3 years, plus 28 scholarships and $8 million. The only reason we didn't get really hammered with bowl ban was because they had changed the charter in the NCAA not to punish the kids who had nothing to do with this, which are kids here today, and the fact that they cooperated probably as well as any university has ever cooperated in the history of the NCAA. So there you go. That's why. So let's get the facts straight. So anyway, I wanted to cover this. I thought it was very interesting, and it does have a lot of Tennessee flavor to it, not only because of Bruce Pearl, but again, the Michigan sports writer trying to lump us in and trying to basically inoculate themselves against any punishment because Tennessee got off with a slap on the wrist. It wasn't a slap on the wrist. Anyway, I thought this would be interesting to cover. I've been watching this kind of closely because it reminds me so much of what we went through with Bruce Pearl, that Jim Harbaugh, because he bought some kids a couple of cheeseburgers and wasn't straight up about it to the NCAA, is now looking at a 4-game suspension. So when the NCAA asks you if you buy somebody a barbecue sandwich or hamburger, just tell them you did and take the little teeny tiny slap on the wrist that you're going to get, and don't be dishonest about it. Simple. But anyway, I guess you got to learn the hard way on that one. Each coach is different. If you like this content, be sure to hit that like button. Let's remember to continue to cover the Vols and all the other goings-ons. And if you've not subscribed, it's on your right, my left. Just hit that little button. I'd appreciate it. And right over here's the most recent video. Be sure to check that out. Got Bruce Pearl staring right at me on this screen. Anyway, we'll see you next time on Sports Talk Jay.